lives during the week. She works in an office in Manhattan and sleeps at the Waldorf. I never question what she does when she's away.
How do you get that cut above your eye?
My daughter kicked a soccer ball in my face the other day and broke my glasses. The glasses are inside. All I had left of the frame was one of the lens shattered.
I think you might have left pieces of that other lens in your F-150.
We're gonna need those glasses.
Somebody call for some oils?
What are you, a scientist or massage therapist?
Why? You want a rub down or a refractive index test? These,
You know, it's amazing how modern detectives use forensic evidence to solve cases. All they need is a sophisticated computer and a well-equipped
The
criminal
most
lab.
important factor in solving crimes is to use inductive and deductive logic.
And who are you?
Well, I'm Sherlock Holmes. Is this machine called?
It's called a computer.
How does a computer work?
Well, I'm using PowerPoint to watch a CSI video.
What is CSI?
It's a crime scene investigation show.
That's what I was very good at in my time, was solving crimes using inductive and deductive logic. I guess the computer is quite elementary. Share with you one of my most famous cases, the case of the Dancing Men. In this case, Mr. Hilton Cubitt was married to Elsie Cubitt. One day, Elsie was out in the garden and she noticed this particular figures drawn on the garden well. She reacted with extreme fright. What do you think about this?
Well, maybe it's some type of message.
Brilliant deduction. That's the same thing I came up with when I examined these stick figures. Now let me share with you what happened during this case. Mr. Hilton Cubitt was found murdered, and it was believed or perceived that Elsie had killed him. However, Elsie had also tried to commit suicide. But as I was able to use cipher analysis and code breaking, I was able to figure out a series of messages that were sent that told me that the real murderer was named Abe Slaney. When I arrived at the crime scene, I started questioning the cook and the cleaning maid, and they gave me some particular pieces of evidence that indicated to me what happened during this murder. There were three key pieces of information that they told me about during this murder. The first key piece of information was that they smelled smoke upstairs. The next piece of information they told me was that the window was locked when they went down to check on Elsie, who was laying on the table with blood coming out all over the table. The next thing I noticed was that the candle had wax on one side. Let's recreate that and see if we can kind of figure out or use some deduction about what we think may have happened with the window and this candle. So if we take this candle and we light it, hold the candle to one side. What you're replicating is the possibility, what would happen to this wax if the candle or the fire moved to one side?
The wax would build up on the side.
And that's one of the things I observed, was that the wax was built up on one side. This told me that the window had to be open for a certain amount of time based upon the observation of wax being on one side of the candle, meaning that, blow on that candle for me. If you constantly blew on the candle, what would happen to the wax?
It would build up on one side.
Exactly. The wax would gutter to one side. Making that deduction, I determined that the window had to be open. The next question in my mind is, if the window was open, someone came through this window into the room where Mr. Hilton Cubitt was. Also, I noticed next to Elsie that there was a bag full of money, and this indicated to me that she was trying to bribe someone to leave her alone. After examining the crime scene, I also remembered the testimony that the maid and the cook said they smelled smoke throughout the house. Again, this is another key piece of information telling me that the window was open, which caused the wax to gutter on one side and then moved smoke throughout the whole house. The smoke being coming from the possible shooting that happened between Mr. Hilton Cubitt and the person who came through the windows. This is what I believe happened during this crime. Elsie was sitting at a table, and Abe Slaney, this person I was able to decipher in the message, was trying to convince her to leave with him. Abe Slaney, I found out, used to belong to a gang in Chicago, and he had come to England to try to convince Elsie to come back with him, but she didn't want to come back with him. So as they were arguing, Mr. Hilton Cubitt heard them arguing, and he came downstairs, and he thought that she was in danger, so he went to shoot Abe Slaney. However, Abe Slaney was able to fire his gun first. Now again, in the testimony of the cleaning woman and the cook, they said they heard a loud shot followed by a not so loud shot. So let's see if we can kind of replicate this crime scene and see what happened. If you wouldn't mind, could you stand up? If you fired at me and I fired at you at the same time, what kind of shot would you hear? Would it be a loud shot or a lower shot? Less loud. It would probably be a less loud shot. It would be a louder shot. However, that's what they heard. They heard a loud shot. Then they heard a not so loud shot. And I was able to deduce that the not so loud shot was the shot that Mrs. Elsie Cubitt had fired into her own head after she had seen her husband killed. Abe Slaney left the crime scene, and when he left, he was not aware that Elsie had tried to commit suicide. So I used the stick figures to convince him to come to the crime scene, and I wrote a simple message saying, "Come here quickly." He arrived, and once he arrived, I was able to arrest him, and he could not figure out how I had broken the code, and I told him what one man can invent, another can discover.
I used the same deductive logic when I solved this math problem. I know that the transformation across the x-axis makes it a negative graph, which eliminates B and D. And the graph moves down 1 unit. Therefore, I know the answer is A.
That's a brilliant deduction. That's the use of inductive and deductive logic to solve a complex problem. And that's the same type of inductive and deductive logic that is used in crime investigation. What you just observed was an example of detective fiction. Detective fiction genre is where a novel or short story in which a mystery is solved mainly by the action of professional or amateur detective. Where the mystery to be solved concerns a crime, the work may be called crime fiction. The traditional formula for the detective story starts with a seemingly irresolvable mystery, typically a murder, like the one in the case of the Dancing Men, features the astute, often unconventional detective, a wrongly accused suspect to whom the circumstantial evidence points, and concludes with a startling or unexpected solution to the mystery, during which the detective explains how he or she solved the mystery.